This week, of course, is the annual meeting for the Real Estate Roundtable. This is the end of our 20th year, beginning our 21st year as the Real Estate Roundtable, representing commercial real estate owners, developers, financiers, and so forth here in Washington, D.C. This year, we're virtual, of course. We hope you're going to join us on Thursday afternoon. And then for our committee meetings, we've got a great program for the main meeting and several great programs for our committee meetings. So to give you a little advance glimpse at what's going to happen at the committee meetings, which I hope you'll join, we're sitting down this morning with the chairs of our various policy advisory committees. Our Sustainability Committee Chair, our Tax Committee Chair, our Research Committee Chair, and our Credit and Capital Committee Chair. We'll also have a little snippet of information from the chair of our Task Force on Homeland Security, very, very important. So we're going to start our discussion this morning with Credit and Capital Committee, which we call RECPAC, Real Estate Credit and Capital. Dennis Lopez. Dennis is the CEO for QuadReal. Good morning, Dennis. How are you?
Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing great. You look like you're in beautiful Vancouver or beautiful somewhere today.
Yeah, it's sunny Vancouver. Never a cloudy day here.
Fantastic. Well, your committee, Chip Rogers is the chief staff person there, doing a great job with your committee. You've been working hard. I know you've filed a lot of letters and done things. Why don't you give us some of the top line events or activities of the committee?
Sure, Jeff. Glad to do that. The committee has been working hard to address some of the liquidity issues caused by the COVID-19 crisis. For example, the CARES Act, which is the Term Asset-Backed Securities Lending Facility, TALF, is now in place and has been providing liquidity to the real estate securities market. Also, another credit facility is the Main Street Lending Program. And then lastly, the committee's been working on increasing the term of the Terrorism Risk Insurance Program Reauthorization Act. This has been increased to have a 7-year term. Our goal was to secure this long-term extension well in advance of the expiry date, which was December 2021. So we beat it by a year.
Well done. Well done. Yeah, I know that on the work that the committee has done advising us on what to do on the TALF, for example, that you mentioned was really critical. We obviously like to do more than just the AAA legacy CMBS, but it was helpful. You mentioned TRIA. Now I know that your committee is thinking and helping us think through if we need a pandemic risk insurance program along the lines of TRIA. Are you going to discuss that at this meeting, your committee meeting?
Yeah, we'll talk about that briefly and get into it. It's still in the early stages of something being done in that area, but we'll be looking forward to talking it over a bit and also hearing what other people's views.
Yeah, it's a little more difficult than I think some people just want to replace terrorism with pandemic, and it just doesn't. It's just not that simple. I believe that French Hill is coming. Congressman French Hill is also coming to your committee meeting virtually, and he's always got good insight for you. Dennis, the other thing that I recall that the committee was working on before the world turned upside down, LIBOR, and the replacement of LIBOR with a different type of benchmark. Is there any follow-up discussion on that issue for this meeting, do you think?
Yeah, well, the committee's been working on that for a transition to SOFR, the Secured Overnight Financing Rate, which will be seen as being more reliable. But at this time, obviously, no conclusions. There's still a bit of time to determine how this will be addressed. But we'll be discussing some of those issues in creating a replacement for LIBOR.
Well, terrific. Well, it sounds like a fantastic meeting. Your committee has been unbelievably helpful. you have been unbelievably helpful. Thank you for your leadership and participation on the committee and helping us through things. Anything else that we didn't talk about? TALF, Main Street lending, the pandemic insurance, LIBOR, any other big issues that or new initiatives from your committee that people should expect to hear when they tune in virtually on Thursday afternoon?
Well, of course, we'll be talking about what's going on in the world. So we're going to have a great panel session with Michael van Konenberg from Eastdil, and also to Michael Billerman from Citibank, and they'll be talking about what's going on in their views on the impact of the pandemic and how things are shaping up for the next few months. So that'll be very interesting too.
Well, that is great. Thank you, Dennis. And your committee, I believe, meets at 3:15 virtually on Thursday. I have a feeling that there's a big sign up for it. And so I hope everybody enjoys it. Thank you, Dennis. Get back to the beautiful Vancouver and your world. And it's certainly a stressful time for everybody for all kinds of reasons. And we appreciate your support and involvement. Now we're going to talk taxes. We have with us the chair of our Tax Policy Advisory Committee, TPAC, Frank Kramer. And Frank has been a longtime member of the Roundtable, and in fact, a member of our predecessor, the National Realty Committee. So Frank has been a force, a voice, a great perspective for me personally and for the organization for many years. As I said, 20 years. We're ending our 20th year, starting our 21st. So Frank is chair of our Tax Policy Advisory Committee, brings decades of experience in real estate and real estate banking in particular to the committee, and guides it very, very well, Frank. We're very happy to have you. So what is TPAC? What are you going to be doing at this meeting? What have you been doing? How's it going? Ryan McCormick, I know from our staff, is doing a tremendous job as the key staff person there. And but we're all about what our volunteers and what our members say. So what's TPAC looking at?
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thanks for all of that. It's great to see you, Jeff. I have the privilege to chair TPAC, to work with Vice Chair Kathy Wyden from the LEFRAC organization, and Ryan McCormick, who you've mentioned, as well as our cadre of very, very competent tax professionals. For the last couple of years, we have focused heavily on consolidating the progress made in the 2017 tax reforms. That bill delegated significant authority to Treasury and the IRS, and it was critical that we stay involved. We did succeed in clarifying real estate's eligibility for the new 20% deduction for pass-through businesses. On some issues, the work is ongoing. For example, we have focused on ensuring that final regulations allow real estate businesses to continue deducting fully their business interest as Congress intended. I expect a positive result here as well. Our Opportunity Zone Task Force detailed legislative and regulatory regulations and recommendations aimed at mobilizing long-term productive real estate capital for job-creating investment in low-income communities. Many of our recommendations were included in the final Treasury rulemaking. Beyond tax reform, we partnered with the Roundtable's Capital Policy Advisory Committee to raise awareness of the unintended tax problems created by phasing out LIBOR in billions of existing real estate loans. Last fall, Treasury proposed regulations that largely tracked our recommendations. We had other successes as well as persuading the IRS to hold off temporarily on new partnership capital reporting rules that were overly burdensome and of questionable value.
Wow, that is a robust activity report. Of course, all of that was before the pandemic hit, and I know that since the virus has had such a tremendous impact, the committee's been very, very active. Why don't you give us a little highlight there of what's going on?
Sure. The following request from the Roundtable, Treasury raised several new pieces of tax guidance that allow partnerships and real estate businesses to benefit fully from tax relief in the $2 trillion CARES Act, such as the carryback of losses and the depreciation of property improvements. These changes, combined with the guidance, will help increase the cash flow of struggling real estate businesses.
That is a full load as well. As we move ahead through the year, the virus is going to continue to impact our membership and so forth. How do you see your committee's focus going forward? Will it shift a little bit or what?
Sure. The focus of tax measures is shifting from economic relief to economic stimulus. Current tax priorities for the real estate industry include ensuring that the tax code does not prevent property owners and lenders from restructuring debt burdens that are unsustainable in the current crisis. We are seeking a broad temporary exemption of cancellation of indebtedness income. We want certain tax changes that will make it easier for landlords and tenants to modify leases, and we want to ensure property owners are not forced to accrue income in the case of rent that is not actually paid. We also want to ensure that related party tax rules do not block REITs from extending an economic lifeline to their commercial tenants. Lastly, we hope to include changes to FERPTA in any infrastructure legislation. Looking out on the horizon, I feel that all of this stimulative fiscal policy will soon put pressure on the federal budget, and that real estate tax policy will again come under scrutiny. So I'm very focused with my colleagues on ensuring that we are well positioned to demonstrate how real estate tax rules contribute positively to jobs, communities, and the overall economy.
Yeah, I just want to second that, particularly on the debt modification issues. Those are going to be very, very important. And, not only, also within pools, within securitized debt. That's where a real issue is, and I know you're focused on that. Frank, have a great meeting. I know you'll have a great meeting. The TPAC meetings are excellent, as are all the committee meetings. And I just want to thank you again and thank everybody on the tax committee for the work they're doing. It's very important. And be well. We'll see you virtually later in the week. And for now, let's move on and talk about some of our environmental issues with Tony Malkin. Thank you very much, Frank.
Jeff, thank you. And thanks for your continued strong leadership. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Now we're going to spend a few minutes talking with the chairman of our Sustainability Policy Advisory Committee, Tony Malkin. Tony is chairman and CEO of the Empire State Realty Trust. Also, obviously, a groundbreaking leader in energy efficiency, energy retrofits, and what's happened at the Empire State Building in terms of improving efficiency and all of his other assets as well. So Tony is the chair. Dan Egan from Bernardo is the vice chair, and the two of them are aided by our great senior vice president and counsel, Dwayne Desiderio. So let's get into it, Tony. You've got a committee meeting coming up this week. I'm sure that it's going to be an unusual virtual time, not the usual live event, but we'll do the best we can. What is SPAC have you been doing regarding the pandemic, and what's your committee going to be looking at this meeting?
Well, thanks, Jeff. We've been extremely busy. The issues we address have not gone away, and in fact, they've become complicated and more important in many ways. In the absence of leadership from the federal government, states, counties, and cities have taken the initiative on sustainability, with the result that regional and national members of our industry face a patchwork of rules and regulations. Our goal has been to make an impact where we can with the federal agencies and commissions to establish standards which make sense and to which we can turn to the states and cities for logical guidance and parameters. On top of that, we have made the impacts of the COVID pandemic on the myriad of energy consumption benchmarking requirements at the federal, state, and local level. And there we have played a role to share information amongst our membership and to engage where and how we can to adjust Energy scores, Energy Star scores, for instance, for 2020 will be massively disrupted based on the inconsistency of responses by cities and states across the nation. My Vice Chair, Dan Egan from Vornado, and a growing and active set of committee colleagues deliver real value to members with top-level convening power for experts and government agencies and commissions. With the prospect of a shift of the center of power in DC ahead of us, we need roundtable membership to recognize the importance of the work. If you own real estate, belong to the Real Estate Roundtable, and do not have a representative on SPAC, you had better get one or risk a hit from your blind side on critical topics that can translate to dollars.
Well, that is well said, Tony. Very well said. You mentioned Energy Star. What, on all of this, what is your relationship or SPAC's relationship with the EPA, for example?
You know, SPAC's constructive relationship with the EPA has been built over the past decade and resulted in significant mutual benefits. Energy Star and its related portfolio manager remain probably the two most important tools in energy efficiency. The standards behind Energy Star and portfolio manager, the award and the tool, have been adopted by states and cities widely and create a predictable format around which our industry can work. Even though they are not federal mandates, they are a consistent benchmark and measurement tool created in DC that people have chosen to use. Right now, the scoring for energy, water consumption, and indoor air quality have been materially disrupted and skewed by the COVID pandemic and resultant changes in occupancy and use. Some buildings closed completely. Some never closed, but occupancy has been way down. And some assets, like multifamily, have had higher occupancy levels than ever, as residents have been working from home. Our constructive relationship has allowed us to work with the EPA on a framework to adjust the results. Because states and cities rely so much on these programs, that helps where our membership does business.
That is very valuable for people. A lot of these issues, I remember going over to FERC with you to talk about energy issues. Those are very important. But as all, states, cities are starting to reopen gradually, phasing in and everything, what do you see from SPAC's point of view as we reopen and re-enter the workplace going forward?
We are also focused intently on what we need to do to make sure our buildings are healthy and safe for their repopulation as we lay the groundwork for fuller reentry and how we communicate these plans to our tenants, guests, and other audiences. The SPAC meeting on Friday will also feature a discussion on, in quotes, healthy buildings, unquote, right? We will have guests from the two main third-party standard setters for building health, the WELL and the FitWell rating systems. We have focused in SPAC on indoor air quality and indoor environmental quality as a developing field for more than 4 years now. It is important that our members share and know what facts are and what is bullshit. We have also reached out to other offices at the EPA for an update on their role in developing the CDC's building cleaning and disinfecting guidance. It is important that our members impact their companies and the markets in which they operate on everything from energy to air quality and to social distancing. Remember, these matters before SPAC are directly relevant to Capitol Hill legislation with regard to liability of businesses in the event of frivolous COVID-related lawsuits. There's a groundswell of support amongst all major industry sectors, real estate, manufacturing, healthcare, nonprofits, and business tenants who rent space and our assets for some kind of liability protections against opportunistic, unfounded lawsuits related to the virus and indoor air quality. The Roundtable, as you know, recently joined dozens of other groups in a letter to the Senate and House leadership organized by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to reinforce that the business community's readiness for recovery must include liability protections. We urge Congress to pass safe harbor legislation for businesses that follow applicable health and safety related guidelines. To be clear, the coalition is not seeking protections against reckless or wanton conduct by some employer that might make a workplace unsafe. However, businesses need guidance from the EPA, CDC, or state agencies that provide a shield from liability.
Well said, Tony. That is absolutely true. Can I just ask one other question? How do you feel, since we've got you here for a minute or two, how do you feel about the guidance so far from CDC and so far from the New York, for example, health department? Just in its
Well, it's interesting you mentioned, we are impacted in New York City, which has really been a center of the outbreak. And things are getting closer to normal, right? They're getting closer to normal. That said, New York State has rolled out a series of very specific checklists, very specific steps, very specific requirements around employee training and contact tracing, very specific steps around tenant requirements, business activities within their own business spaces. CDC is not there. And, the danger that we have is every state and every city does its own thing. And for those of us who are members of SPAC and own properties in multiple jurisdictions, that's where we get back to this patchwork piece. And I'll return to the comments I've made before. We don't need mandates from the federal government. However, we do advocate for standards. And then we as industry can get input into these standards in one forum in the federal government, and then we can work within the jurisdictions in which we do our business to try to make sure those standards are applied there. So we can do that with any administration. We can do that with any Congress, with any Senate, Republican or Democratic. It's just a matter from our perspective that we need to have these standards. And that's what we work towards, to make things simple and better for our industry.
Tony, it sounds like a terrific meeting. And I think because we're doing this virtually, it will expose the committee and the work of the committee to a lot more of our members. And when we get back to normal live meetings, we'll have a lot more people at these meetings focused on these important issues. So thank you very much for what you're doing. And we'll see you. Thank you.
Terrific. We'll see you on Friday. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Well, that was quite interesting. Let's go now and talk about what our Homeland Security Task Force is doing, along with our ISAC. We have a relationship with national federal law enforcement through our ISAC to share information on security and cyber threats and so forth. So with us today, we have Dan Kennedy, who's the Senior Vice President of U.S. Security Operations at Unibail-Rodamco-Westfield, and Charlie McGonigal, Senior Vice President, Global Security and Life Safety in the U.S. Office Division of Brookfield. And they are the co-chairs of this endeavor, and we're delighted that we have our very own Senior Vice President, Chip Rogers, who staffs this group. And I just want to say this is really one of the unheralded and unknown activities of our organization. And at this time, in what's going on around the country and so on and so forth, and the world, this is very important. So what are you guys going to be doing during your committee meeting that's coming up?
Well, thank you, Jeff. Very honored to have Dan Kennedy and Charlie McGonigal on our leadership team. We got to know them initially when they were with the Bureau, and they've carried the torch for both our liaison with the FBI, as well as a degree of professionalism that is a great contribution to the committee, the task force, that is. We've been working extensively on issues affecting building reentry, and we've had weekly calls there, and we'll get into maybe a little bit of that as well. Expect to talk about that a little bit, but Charlie, do you want to talk a little bit about one of our speakers that's coming?
Sure, Chip. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chip. As always, it's a pleasure to be involved in this type of endeavor. I think it's ever so important given the threat landscape and what we as former, federal law enforcement officers and now, security heads for organizations are combating as far as what the threat environment looks like day in and day out as it relates to our properties, our assets, our personnel. I think, the timely nature of what we're dealing with, in the domestic terrorism realm. And when I use the term domestic terrorism, I want to make sure we understand what we're talking about. Obviously, these recent protests, we were aware that it, obviously brought out some individuals who were not necessarily in line with, the mourning of the, tragic incident that occurred in Minneapolis with the death of George Floyd. But I think there were many opportunists that came out undercover and were operating in a capacity that was not in line with, the mourning of the incident that occurred in Minneapolis. They were taking advantage of that situation, which led to, I think, some violence, some vandalism, some criminal activity. And I think, given the timely issues that, are ever present for all of us in major metropolitan areas, we decided that, there was no better place to go than the FBI's counterterrorism division, and to seek out a speaker who is experienced in and is seeing day-to-day activity as it relates to domestic terrorists, agitators, those who are looking to do harm and incite violence and vandalism, and really carry a message that is not in line with, what we're all looking to do in protecting each other, our assets, and the general public as they come in and out of our properties day in and day out. So I think by having someone like DAD Mike Orlando come and speak to the group will be very beneficial, and I think we will learn a lot in the 30-minute time slot we have allotted for him.
Well, that's great. I think it should be a good meeting, and we look forward to that. We also have Brian Parman coming, who's another Bureau alum who is now with Brosnan Security, and he's going to discuss both issues related to building reentry, health issues, liability issues, as well as some of the current threat picture. And then, one of the things we've also been working on is we'll get an update on the ISAC as well from our team there. And then one of the things we've also been working on is pandemic risk insurance, business continuity, and a potential program there that would help protect the economy in the event of another pandemic economic crisis. And so we're going to hear from Jeff Alpaugh with Marsh, who runs their real estate practice, and he's going to do an update on what's going on that front as well. And it should be a good discussion, I think. It's our first virtual meeting, but we'll try to make it work.
Dan, do you have any additional thoughts on the committee meeting and or security things that you've observed at in recent days in your work?
Yeah, so Jeff, also just to kind of add on to both Chip and Charlie's comments, I think really Charlie and Chip both covered the upcoming meeting very well on the speakers, but we've also, starting a few weeks ago, started the Building Reentry Working Group, which is just a collection of both input from the ISAC group, bringing a lot of information to the weekly meetings with regard to building reentry, and as well as a collection of both security managers, building managers, operating staff, for an overall kind of 360 discussion of what does this look like after being down for the better part of 3 over 4 months. What are the opening restrictions and guidelines? What are the risks? What are the liabilities? How are we doing this effectively and efficiently without, incurring additional, again, risks or liabilities that we don't normally have, in the space, physical damage, cyber breaches, you name it. So the working group has come together the last few weeks to begin discussing these things as we open back up, and whatever that looks like with regard to, mandates and restrictions and protocols that we have to put in place. And it was just really, it's just been a great opportunity for the industry professionals to share ideas, thoughts, some of the impediments and things that they're seeing to raise those issues. One, for awareness amongst the group, and then whatever we could forward on up for possible, discussion at a governmental level with regard to some of the things that we're seeing that might actually be overly restrictive in trying to get reopened. So it's been a good discussion group, and it's ongoing. It will continue as several states are open, but we still continue to look forward to opening in major cities.
And are you going to have that group make a report or a presentation of some sort during this task force meeting, at this meeting? Or it's just an ongoing group?
Go ahead, Chip.
It's an ongoing group. We may just report on, to those who weren't able to join the calls, give an update on what the working group's been doing. But I don't play, and I think I've asked Brian Parman from Brosnan to talk a little bit about the issues they're seeing as well. So
well, I think that would be really an interesting summary of what that working group is finding across product types and different geographies. I'm sure it's different. Well, gentlemen, thank you. We'll see you virtually in a couple of days. And thank you very much for your work. These committees are really where the backbone of the organization comes from. The committees comes from our understanding issues. And thank you very much.